Okay, recording now. Let's share that PowerPoint. Okay. By the way, if people have questions, go ahead and chime in because, I've got everybody muted, but if you have something urgent you want to ask about, that's no problem. You can just unmute yourself and say, hey, I got this. Okay. So here we are. First question, what's behind those web pages? Well, as you might have guessed, web pages are written in code, and that code is HTML and CSS. So just like opening a file for some particular application, your browser needs to be able to translate that web page code into content. So there's a process for that, which is called page rendering. We'll talk about that in a moment, but the short version is it's a very standardized process based on modular page elements. So there'll be tags for things like images, there'll be text, there'll be other tags for web objects like interfaces with other applications. All right, so, and we'll get into all of that today. So the three essential coding languages, number one, HTML. HTML is a markup language, which simply means that a long text document is marked up to show how it's applicable to the browser. Cascading style sheets, CSS, that's used for sharing formats and other content across pages. For example, if you have a large banner image you want to appear at the top of every web page, you can use CSS to reference that same image over and over, so you only have to download the image once. And last, of course, JavaScript. JavaScript for active code on pages. For example, back in the day, if you went to some website to play some Angry Birds, right, you did that in the browser, you'd probably be doing that in JavaScript. Okay, so let's move on. So, first thing, web browsers. Okay, so we got a few slides here talking about web browsers and the rendering process, stuff like that. Hopefully it'll make all of this make a little more sense, but if not, that's okay. You don't really have to memorize it. So web browsers, as you know, are the software for accessing internet content like Google Chrome, like Microsoft Edge or Mac Safari, whatever. There's a lot of different browsers, but only a few have substantial market share, right? So the big four, Google Chrome, Edge, Safari, and Firefox. And Internet Explorer still lingers on, but even Microsoft is telling people not to use that anymore. So if you're interested, you can find out what the market shares are, but those are the big ones. But there really are a lot of different browsers out there. A lot of companies over time have tried to make ones, but they haven't really caught on. I guess Samsung has one too. When I use my phone and it says, do you want to see this content? It always gives me the option to see Google or Samsung, their browser. So yeah, there are other ones out there. Anyway, key elements. Number one, user interface, right? How you interact with the browser itself. Number two, the browser engine, sometimes called the layout engine or the rendering engine. That's what takes this HTML and other code and converts it to a viewable web page. JavaScript engine to translate and run the JavaScript code on the page. Some space for data storage. So anything like cookies or other cache data, like images that are reused across pages or temporary application data, stuff like that, that's all going to be kept by the browser. And then interfaces with the network and the operating system and any other applications. Okay, so web browsers provide all that functionality. So the rendering process is essentially translating the web page code, HTML and any scripts. Scripts are the active code on web page, into the content you actually see. So there's four main stages to that. The first one is building the document object model tree. So essentially that means what objects are contained within what other objects. For example, okay, let's do a little notepad on, now we'll do a little paint on that. So I got this, let's bring up paint. Stop my share and do a new share with paint. Okay, so imagine we have some very simple, I'm going to do some pseudo HTML. So we have, put that in black, tag 1, okay, and dot, 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 there's something there. Tag 2, dot, dot, dot. tag 2A, and we'll close that out, tag 2A, tag 2B, tag 2B, close out tag 2, and close out tag 1. Okay, so the basic format here, if we see this tag, that's the opening tag, which starts a kind of content or format. Okay, likewise, if we see this / in a tag, that's the closing tag, which ends it. Okay, so that's the idea there. Now, when we have this text document, it has all this list of tags. And so what we have to do essentially is see which tags are nested within each other one. So we can see here tags 2A and 2B are nested within tag 2. Likewise, tag 2 is nested within tag 1. So when the browser is building this tree, it's going to say, okay, I have tag 1. What's inside tag 1? Well, there's a tag 2. Okay, so I can draw a box within that and say, okay, tag 2 is encompassed within tag 1. Likewise, tag 2A, I don't know what's going on there, some weirdness here with my machine, and 2B are also encompassed by tag 2, okay, and they're separate from each other. So when we say building the document tree, the DOM, document object model, this is what essentially we're doing. So we're taking all of this text and the browser is understanding, okay, I create tag 1. Within tag 1, there's going to be tag 2. Within tag 2, there's going to be 2A and 2B. That's the tree. Just a second, I have a very loud dog. All right, quiet beast. Ugh. 1 second, he's sitting at the window barking. Fine. Get in here, dog. Come on, come on. All right. Have a seat. Okay. All right, be good, be good. We got a lecture going on here. Okay, so that's the idea. So I'm gonna drop out of this. Okay, so back to the slides then. So that's the rendering process. First you build the tree, and then on top of that, you integrate any CSS data. For example, any style formats or extra content that's gonna be shown by default. Once you have all that together, figuring out what all is gonna be displayed on the screen, the next thing you have to do is actually set the layout coordinates. So the particular pixels on your screen where things are going to be displayed. And that's going to be different if you say are looking at a small screen on a smartphone versus a very large monitor for a desktop. And last, painting the image. So actually drawing all the stuff. So first you build the tree, you integrate the CSS data with it, you figure out where the different components are going to show up on the screen, and then you actually draw it. That's the rendering process. Now, there's often there's often minor variation in page rendering. So different browsers can render pages differently. Now you would think there's going to be some standard case, some standard type of HTML, it's all going to be displayed the same way. But that's not true. For example, suppose you have just a simple line of text. Right? There's nothing to say what the default font is going to be for that. So if you have a completely unformatted slug of text on a page, is it going to be in something like Courier where everything is the same width? Is it going to be in Times New Roman, which is popular? It's going to be in Arial, whatever, right? The browsers have that latitude to set a default font. So that's one cause of variation. Another thing is graphics. So this used to be a significant difference among browsers, but they're all seem to be converging over the last several years. Image quality. So some browsers will take shortcuts in displaying images and others won't. So in some, images may display faster, graphics may generally operate faster, but at the cost of various types of graphics imperfections generally. So you would see things like fireflies, like little lit up pixels on the screen that didn't really seem to belong there. Okay, so that was a common difference. So most browsers are going to display the vast majority of pages in the same way, but not all of them. Okay, and there may be some slight differences across browsers. JavaScript engines are the other component that we talked about. Their primary role is reading and interpreting JavaScript code. Now, again, there is variation in JavaScript engines, but they all tend to be focused on doing it quickly, because the main reason why people like JavaScript on their pages is for active code. One of the big uses for that is online games. And if the JavaScript isn't fast, right, the code's going to run like sludge and people aren't going to be happy and they're going to use a different browser. So again, there's this convergence going on where all the JavaScript engines tend to prioritize speed. Okay, so and yeah, not much to add about that. All right, so that's our quick intro to how browsers work. But after this, we're basically into the coding aspects of it. So we'll start with HTML. Okay. Now, one thing I should mention, for those of you who's using Macs, and there are surely many of you, for a Windows machine, it's easy. You write the code in Notepad and you save it as whatever format you want. On a Mac, you have to pick the plain text option. And once you've picked plain text option for a file, then you can change the extension on it fairly easily. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to write a very quick HTML file. Okay, I'm just going to lift what we have here on the next page, or the next, here we go. I'm going to lift this from a couple slides down. Okay, we'll come back. All right, so I open up Notepad. Here, I'm going to share Notepad with you now. There we go, there's my Notepad. Okay, and I'm going to paste in some HTML. Okay, so here we have doc type HTML. I'm going to get rid of that period there. We're going to say here's the start of the HTML. We have a header. Okay, so here I'm going to have some header stuff, H1, H2, and then I'm going to have the body of the document where something happens, and then the footer, I'll have something down at the bottom, and then I'll close out the document. Okay, so that's basically the structure of the tags there. Now, I can save this, save as. Okay, and I'm going to save it in my fall 2020 folder. I'm going to save it as HTML. I'll just call it doc1. doc1.html. Now I have to save it as all files, okay, which is like the equivalent of the plain text for Mac, I guess. So I can automatically change. I can easily change the file extension on it without being overridden by the system. So I save that. And then when I open up the file, I'll let you guys see if I can see it. Let's see. I'm gonna try this. See if you can see, there you go. You can see my file folder here. The one that I just created is listed there as doc1. And if you look very closely, you'll see there's a little blue E for, you know, it's a web page. So I double click on that. I say open it with Edge. Let's open it with Firefox. Let's see what happens. All right. And then I'm going to pop back and do the share. And you can see how it looks in the web page. Okay, where's my, there we go. And just like I had in my document, I have a couple of headers for header stuff. I have in the body of the document primary page content, and as the footer, this page written by Joe. So I write this stuff in plain text, and it translates to web page content. Ta-da! Okay. Okay, so let's, we'll go back to the slides then. Okay, so let's talk about HTML then. So HTML is this markup language and essentially controls the presence, arrangement, formatting of page elements using what are called markup tags. Basically a way of saying this part of the text should be interpreted in this way. So some text is just plain text, some text is tags, Some text is content within tags. So basic structure, basic format for HTML. Any text that's going to be displayed as text is just written as is. You have pointy brackets, like we've seen, to begin components or specify a particular format, and then a / to end one of those tags. So key features of HTML, number one, it's translated sequentially. So your browser starts with the start of the document and reads all the way through it from beginning to end. So there's no branching off like you see in many other types of coding. Number two, it's generally not case sensitive. Of course, if you have plain text, sure, that's going to be displayed as upper or lowercase as depending. But all the typical commands in HTML, you can write it in lowercase, you can write it in uppercase, HTML doesn't care. Last thing, unlike many languages, HTML errors don't typically invalidate the entire page. The browser will translate as much as it can. So if there are mistakes in your page, sure, that can disrupt the layout. Things may not display as intended, but the browser will generally not say, oh, there's a flaw in this HTML, I quit. Okay, it'll try to display as much as it can. And that is very different, as we will see, from JavaScript. In JavaScript, if there is a tiny mistake somewhere, everything fails. So, reason for this, back in the early days of the internet, all these web pages were being made by hand. And of course, people screwed up stuff all the time. So the idea was you wouldn't want somebody to go to your website and see nothing because of some typo, right? So the browser is going to try to explain, is going to try to display as much as it can. Okay. So key versions of HTML. Right now we're in the era of HTML5. It's been around for a few years. There are surely lots of good people working on HTML6, but for right now we have HTML5, and the changes for that are still being felt. The single big one is simply that software plugins like Macromedia Flash are essentially being phased out because of the capabilities of HTML5. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the course. Earlier versions, HTML4 and 4.01 from the late 90s, so there was a long gap there where there was not any major revision of HTML. And there's another one called XHTML, which was trying to do some things in a different direction. Technically, it still exists. I mean, you might even find an occasional list of data out there in an XHTML file, but it's basically dead. Nobody's really working on it. So, yeah. Anyway, if you're interested, I have a first link to this w3schools.com site. They start talking about HTML. I have a lot of links throughout for this HTML and CSS content. It's a pretty good site, W3 Schools, for getting your first intro to these languages. Okay, so this is the actual code that I posted just a minute ago that I did in Notepad and then created a web page out of. So your typical web page pattern is going to be something like this. Okay, so you're going to have tags. You might have a header, stuff that's at the top of the document, the body, the stuff that's in the middle of the document, and the footer, stuff that's at the bottom. Okay, and then you close it all out, say HTML. Now, there are a lot of online HTML editors. So I'm going to go, we'll do a little bit of that. They're not that hard to find. So let's do that. We'll go, online HTML editor. Let's see what we got here. Okay, like I said, there are various different ones. We'll see if this one's good. Oh yeah, I like this one. I remember this one. Okay, so over here, I gotta share. We're doing this. Okay, so I'm sharing this online editor. So over here on the right, we have the window for the source editor. So the source code is the stuff that the humans write, like you and me. Over here on the left, that's the panel that displays the actual HTML. So if I delete all the source code on this, then everything on the left goes away. Right? And I can do stuff like, this is HTML, haha. Okay, but I can copy what I had in PowerPoint and basically put all that in here. And you can see how it displays. Whoops, I got, okay. Ta-da. So again, I have that period there, which I didn't really want. Okay. So there we go. I have the header, I have the other header stuff, I have this, and I can make whatever reasonable changes I want in it. If I'm going to do stuff like show images, I have to upload them somewhere so they're accessible through this editor. So that's a bit of a problem. But I can do whatever you know, style formats I want. For example, if I want this to be in boldface, right, or italics, let's do it in italics. There you go. I can make it italics. How about that? Okay. All right. So we have these online HTML editors that are kind of fun. Although again, they're a bit limited because they have this problem around uploading files if you want to display images. Okay. So let's go back to the slides for a second. Okay. So that's it. HTML headers. That's the first one. So your basic headers in HTML, numbers H1 through H6. So H1 is the biggest, H6 is the smallest. We can go back to our browser here, our HTML editor, and I'll let you see that. So over here I've got H1. Down below it I have H2 if I want to make it smaller. Do H3 or H4 or H5 or H6. If I start going over, like H7, it's not there, H8, different browsers do different things. Sometimes, I mean different HTML editors. Sometimes if you do an invalid number, it'll convert it modulo 6, it'll divide by 6 and use the remainder. Other ones like this one, if I do 7 or 8, it's gonna just ignore it. It'll say, oh, that's not valid, okay? But 6 is the smallest conventional one and 1 is the biggest. We'll leave that as 2. So back to the slides. Okay. There we go. So any text in HTML, if it's something that's completely outside the pointy brackets, for example, it appears in the body tag, but is outside any other tags, then it'll just appear as text. Okay, so for other things, the pointy brackets will tell how to display the text. And this is the core of the markup language idea. Let's bring this into, we're going to bring this into Paint. If I can find it, which I had, there we go, there's Paint. Okay, so the idea with markup how markup works. Imagine you have a line of text like the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Okay, standard typing exercise because it contains all the letters. Suppose you wanted fox to appear in bold, okay, and dog to appear in italics. Well, as a human, you would mark that up, right? You'd put some kind of box around fox and a different kind of box around dog. Well, that's essentially the idea of markup languages. Okay, so when you do this, when you're writing it in HTML, you would do the quick brown, and then you would do a B tag for boldface, fox, jumped over the lazy, and then an I for italics, dog. Okay, and that's the same thing. Then the browser knows, oh, here's where boldface starts, here's where it ends. Everything in between there, I'm going to write in bold. Likewise for the dog, starts, the italics tag starts here, ends after dog. Everything in the middle, the word dog, shows up in italics. Okay, that's the idea for markup tags, for how it applies to text. Okay. So key things with formatting. We talked about headers, paragraphs. If you want text to be set apart from other paragraphs, you can do a P tag. And then line breaks, if you want to put an empty space, an empty line of text between things, you can do a BR tag. In older HTML, you might see a font tag, but those are generally outdated these days, and they work through style tags, excuse me, or CSS. So the fonts, that was in HTML4 and earlier. For HTML5, it no longer really works. So one of the strange things that can happen is if you're not doing too much other stuff on a page, if it's pretty simple HTML, yours might get translated as HTML4 and the font tag will work. But if you start putting in some elements that are definitely HTML5, then the browser is going to say, oh, this is an HTML5 document, and then your font tags may not work as expected. Because you got to pick one or the other. You got to pick HTML4 or HTML5. Okay. Now, another issue is odd text. So if it's not just plain letters, there are some things, special characters that require sequential keystrokes or conflict with other HTML characters, right? So things like quotes, like the pointy brackets themselves that you don't want HTML to interpret as part of HTML, semicolons. Anyway, HTML5 has a big character set called UTF-8, which is intended to encompass all languages worldwide. Okay, all written languages worldwide anyway. And in that, there's a hexadecimal system for specifying characters. So it's basically where decimal is base 10 with numbers 0 through 9. Hexadecimal is base 16 with numbers 0 through F. And if you were paying attention the other day, we saw we used some hexadecimal for the color schemes as well. In our RGB 24-bit color, we had 0 to FF for red, 0 to FF for green, 0 to FF for blue. So same kind of idea here. Now, in this system, the quote character, the double quote, its number is 34. Well, in hexadecimal, that's 22. Okay, so one way to write that in HTML to make that appear, you can use an ampersand and a pound sign and 34. And that way, and then a semicolon. And then the browser is going to know, oh, you mean a quote character. Likewise, if you do ampersand, pound sign, and then an X followed by a number, the X indicates that what follows is going to be a hexadecimal number. So X0022 means 2 times 16 plus 2 equals 34. Or you could just use a special character. Since the quote tag is common enough, ampersand quote is going to let your browser know as well this is a quote tag. So there's a variety of ways to include these special characters in your HTML documents, and the more common ones tend to have words. Okay, moving on. So page elements, all your things on HTML, your tags are going to specify things on the page. So the core assumption is your page is going to be mostly text, and the tags are either going to specify how it's formatted or additional web objects that get inserted into the page. So tags are either going to specify formats or they're going to be containers for things, either containers for their own standalone content or containers for other tags that might hold content. In HTML, all tags are nestable. That means they can contain other tags, and new formats are going to override the older ones. For example, this is, again, a little bit of deprecated code here, but if we had one font, Cambria, right? So we started here in our header, we started with the font Cambria, and then in one header, we did breaking news, blah, blah, blah. And then the second one following after that, we switched over to Elephant. That font would apply to the H2 tag. So this parakeet gets revenge line, that would appear in the Elephant font, but the other text would appear in Cambria. But let's see, I'm going to give it a try. We're going to see if it works in the HTML editor that I have. I'm going to copy that, and we're going to share over in our HTML editor, and we're going to see. Okay. Yeah, see, it doesn't like that because of the HTML5 issue. So the font, it doesn't want to mess with that. See if I do this. Times New Roman. Yeah, it pretty much ignores that. So again, this one is not accepting the font command. That's okay. They generally don't. All right. But it's still a good thing for illustrating the principle. So hold on, I saw a thing there. Let's see. So there's a question here. Does that have to be in brackets also? Does what have to be in brackets? Okay, we have a question here. In brackets. No, that just appears on its own as plain text. All right, so I can lift that. We can do that same thing. I'll go share with that. Okay, we'll share in the online editor. Okay, so I'm going to undo what I did here. Okay, and up here, I'm going to do header stuff. So right before that, sorry, this thing is a little squirrely. See, I put in that there, boom, it makes the quote for me. How about that? Okay, but it doesn't like something that header. Just, oh, I got to do the semicolon. Yeah. So there you go. Okay, it doesn't need to be in brackets. Okay, good. Back to the slides then. Okay, so again, tags are nestable. That's the key thing, and I introduced that idea before when we were talking about the DOM tree, document object model tree. But yeah, tags are nested. If they weren't nestable, then this whole process of constructing the DOM tree wouldn't really work. Okay, now a key thing that you'll see in HTML, especially when we do stuff with JavaScript, is the on-click attribute. So different tags may have attributes. If I zip back here to the font, you see that the font is the tag, but they have an attribute face, which is, you know, the style, not the style, but well, what we would just call the font, right? And back here I have face is Arial, size is 8, color is green. Again, that font tag has different attributes. Well, one of the ones that comes up a lot in JavaScript is the on-click attribute. So any tag that's on a page is potentially clickable. It exists somewhere on the page and you can click it, even if it's not obviously clickable, right? So a button, that's obviously something you can click, you know where to click it, but you can have an on-click attribute for a paragraph, for example. So anywhere if you click within that slug of text, it'll recognize that. So in the on-click attribute, for example, here we have a button, and if it says on-click equals get element by ID, demo, dot inner HTML date, okay, this is a little bit of JavaScript. Basically what's going to happen is the on-click command, it's going to find wherever the demo tag is, right? So here I have a paragraph in the script. I have a paragraph tag with the ID of demo. So it finds, that tag, that is the demo that I'm talking about. And within its inner HTML, right, so inside the tag, it's going to display the date. So this date with the parentheses after it, it's a call to a date function that's going to display a standard long form date. And I can actually lift all this and put it in online text editor, but I'm going to do it. Let's see what happens. But some of these text editors or HTML editors, they don't really cooperate with JavaScript. But the one that's good for that is if I go to W3 Schools JavaScript. Well, I'm going to find it here and I'm going to bring it up. Okay, good. So I'm going to bring that up here in a second.
I actually have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So is that why we tend to use the regular text file just to like relieve some of the restrictions that the online editors give?
Yeah, if you do it on your own machine, yeah, it'll be easier. Now, again, you'll want to code your stuff in HTML5 when we do it. And the only major difference we're probably going to see with that is with the font issue, right? Everything else is pretty much, what's the word I'm looking for? It's advanced graphic stuff that we're not really going to do in HTML, right? So there are some differences, but for this course, yeah, we're going to keep it pretty basic, and fonts are the big difference. If you do it on your own machine, you have all this kind of latitude. But definitely with JavaScript, yeah. So, okay, I'm just going to write it over in here because I can do that. So key reasons to do HTML, CSS, JavaScript on your own machine. Well, number one, you can actually run all the JavaScript. Okay. Number two, you can store and reference images, okay, and other files. Otherwise, I mean, yeah, you can do that with online editors, but you need to be able to upload files if you're going to display them in your image, if you're going to display them on your web page. Number three, right? What else? Well, it solves the versioning issues and other variability across editors, right? When you're going out and trying different editors, you may find that something that works fine on one editor doesn't work on another. And until you recognize that that's the problem, you can tear your hair out trying to debug it. You're like, why is this not working? I don't know. It seems okay. Okay, so it's generally a good idea to do all this stuff on your own machine. I just do it on these online editors for demo purposes only. Okay, so let's get rid of this and go back to where we were. Okay, so I'm going to lift the code from the slides here. If you want, you can go to the same page and do it yourself. All you got to get to this quickly, just do a Google search for W3 Schools JavaScript Try It Now. And this Try It Now is their JavaScript capable editor. Okay, so I'm going to put something in here. First of all, we're going to create a button. Oh, wrong thing. First of all, we're going to create a button. Okay, so if I run that, the button appears, but it doesn't do anything yet because if I click on it, because I don't have this tag down below. The other part, I'm going to lift here. Okay, this is my script and related content. Okay, so here I have a paragraph tag, and the paragraph again has a demo attribute, right, for ID, has an ID attribute that's demo, and on click, this is what happens. So if somebody clicks this paragraph, it's going to change it to red. Okay, so that's not super interesting, but it exists. If I wanted to, I could put in some text here, so I do. It says click me to change my color. So if somebody clicks on that, it's going to call this my function and change it to color red. So on click equals my function. It's going to call that. What's going to happen? It's going to send along these two things, this and red. So this is the element that'll be changed. Red is the color that'll be changed to. So that particular element, its style attribute, its color attribute will be changed to color, right? So style is the overall format. Then the color attribute of that style will be changed to whatever color I said, which is red. Okay, so I run this, boom, it says click me to change my text color. Okay, let's do it. So I'm going to click in there. Aha, it changes to red like magic. Likewise, if I click this button, what's the time? It displays the text, right? The standard long form date, but also in red at that point. Okay, so kind of fun. Anyway, let's go back to the slides then. So that's the idea with this onClick command. Okay, this onClick attribute, I can use it to specify what happens when I click on something. Now we'll have much more to say about all this in JavaScript, but again, the simple thing is an HTML tag can have an onClick attribute that specifies what happens if somebody clicks on it. Okay, I don't expect everybody to already know how all this JavaScript works. I'm just kind of walking through what happens. Okay. Other things, links and iframes. Okay, so links, of course, are very useful. They allow you to go to other pages. And in fact, that's the H in HTML, hypertext, right? You can actually do things like links. So it's more than just plain ordinary text. Now, most often those links are going to be text, but they could be other things. That's fine. If you wanted to do a link, you use the A tag. And then it's going to have an href attribute for hyperlink reference to go to some URL, some other uniform resource locator like Amazon.com, Google.com, UIC.edu, whatever. So standard format for that, number one here, href equals some URL inside quotes. And then inside that you write text to show how that link is going to display. And then you close out the tag. Or you can just do it to a pound sign. The pound sign just means return to the top of the screen. Okay, so either one of those is going to go somewhere, but the first one is probably going to go to a different page and the second one won't. Okay, we'll do an example of that then. All right, so again, one of the things you'll also see, some online editors have that capability to link. They have that disabled as well. So, but we're going to do the try it editor. So if I wanted, I could do a link here. Okay, so let's do a href equals https www.uic.edu. We'll see if I got the HTTPS correct. Okay. Click to check out UIC. Okay. So we'll run this. We'll see how it works. Boom. Click to check out UIC. Aha, there it appears in this other tab, like magic. Hooray. Holy shit, there's a lot of stuff going on over there. Okay. Okay, so that's it. So we can link to other pages, and it's not too bad, right? Now, this page is short enough that the pound sign to the top of the page isn't going to take me anywhere interesting, but it would still work. Okay. Very good. Hold on. I've got to fire this back up again. Okay. So iFrames, on the other hand, iFrames are embedded third-party content on a page. So it's not from the page owner, and it's not from the person viewing the page. It's from some other source. For example, if you have your random blog and you want to let people like it through Facebook, you might put an iframe that allows that Facebook thumbs up to go through it. Okay, that would be an example of something that's typically done as an iframe. So in a sense, it's like a web page within a web page. You allow some other outside source to put some little bit of content inside your page. Okay. Anyway, that's what iframes are. We're not going to do much with them, but you ought to know what they are. Okay. Another thing in HTML, forms. Okay, so forms allow people to enter data through text boxes. Okay, so for example, if you're logging into a system, you got to enter your username and password. If you're going to create an account and you have to enter personal info, make a credit card transaction, right? Enter in all those credit card details. Those are all done through HTML forms. Okay, so the way that works syntactically, first you have a tag for the form, then you have an input type, whatever that's going to be, and then you have an action where the data is going to be sent. Okay, so it's going to be delivered to some other part of the system. And then you have a method. Right, there's a get method where it appears, all the stuff you send along appears in the URL. Typically that's done for short or non-secure data, things you're not really worried about. If it's a post method, then all of the things you send along will not appear in the URL, and that keeps it more secure. Then lastly, there's going to be some submit button. So the input type there would be submit, and the value, whatever text you have in it, would be submit. So we can do this, but I'm going to go straight to the W3 Schools one on forms. So that's easier to get to. We'll share that. Okay, so W3 Schools HTML forms. Boom. Okay. So there's a good little write-up here, and we can do try it ourselves. Okay, so here, this form action where it's going to be sent to actionpage.php, and we have different things. So there's first name. Okay, these are the labels on it. Okay, so here they're going to call it F name, and it's marked with text first name over in the right panel. And if we see here over here, input type text, we're entering in some text. It has an ID. It has a value, John. That's the initial text for it. Likewise, the next one, input type equals text, and it has the initial value, Joe. If we click on submit, it sends the form data to action page. Okay, so there we have it. So if we do go ahead and press click, press submit, boom. Okay, input was received as F name equals John, last name equals Doe. There it is. So that's what we send that stuff to the server and it sends us back that response. But they do that on the server side, so we don't really see that. Anyway, that is a quick intro to forms. Now, we're not going to do stuff in this course where we actually have to connect to a server and do things. We're just going to deal with the structures. Okay. All right. Mostly this is about, you know, the main language we do in this course is going to be JavaScript, because there'll be other courses in the under the IDS umbrella where you do that sort of back and forth with servers. But what makes this course different is this is the one place you can get some JavaScript. So we're not going to do what all the other courses are doing. Okay, so back to our slideshow. Okay, so forms. There's other formats you can use besides just text boxes. You can do radio buttons. For example, if you're doing some sort of online poll and you want to give people like 6 or 10 or 100 options and they can pick one, that's what radio buttons are for. Once you pick one option, it unpicks all the other options, just like an old-timey car radio from, you know, 1975 or so. You can have a masked password. So if you want the password to appear as a sequence of black dots instead of actual letters, you can do that. So input type is password. Okay, you can have a reset button where it's going to clear things. Anyway, if you're interested, there's your W3 Schools link to different types of input tags. Okay. Last little bit, media. So yeah, HTML supports images, audio, video, all that. Back in the day, HTML, if you wanted to run a video, you had to have some other application as a plugin to run along with your browser. These days, you can run it pretty much natively through HTML5 itself. So there's been this weird little bit of versioning issues that's mostly all resolved by now. But there were some earlier formats that HTML5 didn't support when it was first being around. Likewise, some formats aren't supported by the older HTML. If you go to a web page that expects to be able to play the video through the web page without a plugin, there's going to be some problem, right? So for example, if you go to Facebook and you try to play some game that relies on Flash Player, it's not going to work until you activate Flash Player for that page. All right. So anyway, yeah, plugins allowed this sort of thing to happen. So video for videos, audio for audio, object and embed for images. There were a bunch of different tags, okay? But yeah, these did have a bunch of security troubles. So if you're interested, you can look up all of the vulnerabilities for Adobe's Flash Player. There were a lot, okay? And that's basically what led to the implementation of HTML5, is trying to do the advanced graphical things that Flash Player could, but natively through the browser instead of through another application. Okay. Last little bit about HTML, application program interfaces, or APIs. So APIs basically allow you to interface with other applications. So since we're talking about a browser, the first application is the browser, and the other application is something else. Okay, so for example, Google Maps. You open up your browser, you have the web page there, there's a big chunk in the middle of the screen where Google Maps does its thing. Likewise, you go to YouTube, your browser is already up and running. There's going to be a bunch of different places where either video thumbnails get shown, or if you actually click to watch on a video, you give over a portion of your screen to let YouTube deliver that video stream. Okay, so all those kind of things. Yeah, HTML supports that in various ways. You can allow other applications to bring content to your page, much like an iFrame. Okay. I guess this is the last thing, scripting. Okay, so scripting, like we did a little bit with JavaScript, scripting allows dynamic content on pages. So basically allows pages to respond to user actions or other events like timers running out. There's two basic parts to this. Number one, writing the script itself, and number two, specifying when the script executes. So for example, if we bounce back a few slides here to this, right, we had a couple scripts going on in here. First one, if somebody clicked on the button, the paragraph with the ID demo would display the date. Likewise, if somebody clicked on paragraph with the ID demo itself, the text color would change to red. So there are a couple different things that could happen based on our actions. So those are simple scripts. So the key HTML elements are a script tag for running scripts. Okay, so it could either include the scripting statements or reference some external script file. Also, you can have a no script for cases where scripting is disabled. If somebody says, I'm worried about JavaScript on my browser, I want to be super secure, I'm going to disable scripting. So no script could allow you to, for example, display a message like, this application cannot run because you have JavaScript disabled, something like that. Okay, obviously we'll get much more into that in the few weeks to come. Okay, that's it for HTML. So I'll take a moment if people have questions. Which tags should be most important from the PowerPoint, the ones you expect us to really know? Well, you'll be writing HTML documents and JavaScript code. And you'll have access to online resources. Okay, so I may have to update the syllabus. There's not going to be an exam for this first one. It's going to be a bunch of coding exercises. So what are the important ones? Basically, paragraph, line breaks just for simple formatting, form for creating forms, images, right? Yeah, you'll see. There'll be a bunch of ones, IMG for images. Those will be the big ones we're going to do. No, this first module, no exam. Okay, the problem is there would be so much of the exam that's just coding syntax. An online exam is kind of pointless. All right, so instead, you'll get extra coding assignments. Extra compared to prior years. So that's the way this first module is going to work. And like I said, despite what the syllabus might say, I think the syllabus may say there's an exam 1, but there isn't. Or there's an exam, you know, there isn't. Yeah, learn by doing. There you go. Okay. There will be exams on subsequent topics, though. Okay. Wonderful. So I hope you do all learn it. All right, then that'll be like a bullet point you can put on your resume down the road. I assume everyone here is an IDS major. And then you'll be able to say, yep, I know some JavaScript. I've done a little bit with it. Okay? All right. Does module mean homework? No. The course content is divided into 3 modules. Okay? Module 1 is basically web design and, you know, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Okay. Second module is web analytics and uses thereof. Okay, like advertising through Google. We'll talk about that. And then the third one is enterprise networking, basically. Enterprise networking issues. So things like internet, enterprise network infrastructure, security, and a couple other things. Okay, so those are the 3 modules, and we're in the first module now. Okay. So good. All right. Well, let's knock out a little bit of the CSS. We may or may not finish it all today, but whatever happens, we'll come back to it. Okay, so back to the PowerPoints. So CSS is a way of caching presentation data and formats in the browser. So things like background images. Main reason for that is it helps pages load faster and minimizes the load on the web, the website's network. So it doesn't have to keep delivering data over and over. Another nice thing about it is it ensures a uniform presentation across the site. So even though humans, if they design a big batch of web pages, there might be errors in them. With CSS, there's not going to be. You can automatically say, well, every page is going to use this component in the same way. And so the website will appear uniform. Okay. Now, way back when, before CSS, so think back in the 90s, pages were coded individually. So code reuse, at best, it was cut and paste. You'd have to do it all by hand. And if the HTML was fairly complex, or even it was sort of complex and people were just careless, there were going to be a lot of errors. And the fact that because it was done by humans and you needed this proofreading, well, that slowed down the addition of new pages, right? So imagine if you're Amazon and you're trying to add on, millions of pages, product pages every year, you need some sort of automated method to do that. Again, number one, to reduce the incidence of errors, but number two, just to get it done faster. So, go to the slide. So there's three basic styles of CSS. Number one is external, and most CSS is done as external CSS. So you have some CSS document that specifies the format for a particular page. Basically, for a list of tag types, it's going to specify all their formats. That's called a style sheet, and then you reference that. Okay, there is an error in here. I'll have to fix that. One thing you'll see, HTML does not like these curly quotes. So if you look close at the one following the href on the third line there, you can see it's a curly quote, and that's not going to work. I got to go in and fix that. This is what happens when you do stuff in Microsoft sometimes. The second one, internal. So internal CSS, use instructions for one particular page. So you may have some overarching framework that most pages are going to be in, but if you have one page that's going to be different, well, you can specify a CSS format for just that page. And generally where you do that is within the head section. So if you're referencing an external CSS file, you put that reference in the head section, which is something above the body, above even the header of the document, the very first thing in the HTML document. For external, you have a line that references the file, this link tag. For internal, you just put a style block in that head, and that's going to specify how tags are displayed on that particular page and only that page. The last one, inline. So inline CSS is actually contained within the HTML document itself, which seems strange, right? Why would you want to do that? What's the point? Well, if you want to change the style of a particular component, or if you want to have a non-uniform style across different portions of a page, yeah, you can't use an internal CSS for that. Internal CSS is going to apply that to your entire document, right? If you want to break that up somewhere, you need to use inline. So whatever the existing CSS format is, if you want to override it, you need to use inline CSS. Okay, and there's a link to W3 Schools that talks about those, but it's basically all just the stuff I said. Okay, so a CSS document fundamentally is a set of rules. Basically, for every tag type, you have a code block that specifies the rules. Okay, so the selectors are the web components that are affected by the code block. And then you have a declaration block following the selector that says, here's how it's going to be. So for example, we talked about how the font tag in HTML5 no longer really worked. Instead, it's done through CSS. For example, if you want to have H1, if you want to specify that as color red and specify the text alignment as being centered, you could have H1 as the selector. So anywhere that the browser encounters an H1 tag, it's going to display it with red colored text and center aligned text. Okay, pretty easy. Okay, another thing, something called pseudo-classes. Okay, so pseudo-classes basically, well, a class, if you've taken Java, right, a class is going to specify how all things act. When you create objects of that class, they're all going to have the same set of methods and store the same kind of data. They call it pseudo-classes in CSS because it kind of looks like a class. It has a superficial coding appearance to that. but it's not exactly the same thing. So pseudo is just a fancy word for fake. It's not really a class, but it kind of looks like a class. So we're going to go over to this HW3 schools one. I'm going to close this share for a second and fire up the other thing. I'm going to find it here. And then I'll share it. W3 schools pseudo classes. Okay. Okay, pseudo classes. So pseudo class used to define a special state of an element, blah, 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 but we're going to do the try it yourself. Okay, so here's what we have. So there's 4 different ones. Here's for an unvisited link, which shows up as color FF0000. So RGB, the red is maxed out at 255. The others are 0, so it's going to be red. A link that's been visited, again, RGB, the green is maxed out, so that's going to appear as green. If we put the mouse over it, right, if we're just hovering over it, we're maxing out the red and the blue, mix red and blue together, you get purple. And if we have a link that's selected, right, that we've selected now in that moment where the mouse is actually clicking down on it, RGB, the blue is maxed out, it's going to be blue. So we can try it ourselves. Okay, so here we get a link. This is a link. If I hover over it, aha, right, it turns, in this case, it turns to hot pink. That's a little disturbing. Okay, but if I have clicked on it, right, it appeared blue briefly. Okay, if I go back to it, look, now it's green because I have clicked on it. Okay, all right, and if I run it again, it's still, it has not forgotten that I've clicked on it. Okay, yeah, you can see a little flash of red when it's first created. Okay, so that's a pseudo class. So we have a bunch of different varying styles for an element depending on its state. Okay, and all of these terms in there, you saw that there was a list of terms like visited or hover. Those are all defined in the HTML language. So for the CSS language, you don't have to worry about those yourself. Okay, you just look them up. So back to our slides then. Okay, one last thing about pseudo classes. Order is important. So generally the pseudo classes are going to use the first matching condition. So in that one, the very first one we saw was, I'm going to go reference that, was unvisited. Okay, so if something hadn't been visited yet, then it would appear as a, well, actually it uses the last one, doesn't it? It's kind of variable there. So if we mouse over it, it's going to do hot pink. It's going to do the last one. Sorry, I got to edit that too. Okay, so yeah, if we have it, if it's been unvisited, then it's going to appear in one thing, but if we hover over it, that's going to override the other. So it scans through all of them and then goes with the last one that it found that met those criteria. Okay. Likewise, you have another thing called pseudo elements. So you can do fractions of an element to have them display in a certain way. And there are a bunch of those defined in the language as well. For example, the first letter of headers, paragraphs, or sentences, if you want to have those look big, like some old-timey manuscript, yeah, you can do that. Or anything selected by the user. If you want to have something selected by the user appear in a different format. For example, if the user highlights some text, you can have that appear a different way. Okay, so simple way you might do that. H1, so we have this tag, and so the first letter in an H1 tag will give it, make it bold and slightly larger, font size 125%. Again, HTML W3 Schools is a good reference for all of these specific terms that, you know, otherwise you're not going to know, oh, I can do it font weight or I can do font size. Yeah, you can look that up over there. Okay. So key things, CSS3. CSS has gone through a few generations just like HTML, but it's a little different. The way it works with CSL, it tends to be a modular progression. So different parts of the language will be upgraded at different times. They don't necessarily release it all in one big batch. Okay, and CSS4, things that have been worked on for that, same kind of thing. So different aspects like graphical elements tend to advance a little faster. Other things, they might just stay as is. So the idea is it's going to be backward compatible in most cases. You'll be able to use your older elements of CSS without having to totally revise things. Okay. Another thing, responsive web design. So we'll talk about this briefly. So one of the key issues of CSS, web designers want all their pages to look good on different devices, but there's a lot of variance across devices, right? So smartphones with tiny screens versus desktops with big screens. How do you design it to look good on everything? Well, yeah, it's kind of complicated. So one problem with that, first of all, CSS has historically not always been uniformly processed by different browsers. Now, things have gotten a lot better over the last 10 years, but yeah, for a while there was some weirdness across different browsers. So number one, it wasn't good for users. Users had a lot of variance in pages. And number two, it was bad for CSS. If CSS is supposed to be a standard and it's not actually working in a standard way across browsers, people might not go along with it, right? So the basic design priorities, number one, expect varying viewport sizes, right? So some screens will be bigger than others. Number two, design pages for small size first, right? So figure out if you have the tiniest possible screen, what you're going to show. And then if as the screen gets bigger, you can go up from there. So generally the way this works is you'll have some mechanism for recognizing the viewport size. You say, how big is the screen that this is being looked at? And so we go all the way back, we can zip through the slides, go all the way back here to how the rendering process works. We have step 3 there, setting the layout coordinates for the device screen. Yeah, figure out how much space you have to work with, figure out what components then you're going to show, and paint that page. Okay, and the rest of it leave as links. So one of the things you often do in this kind of responsive web design is you figure out some things I'm going to show immediately, other things are going to be only accessible through menus because there's not enough screen space for them. Okay. So I'm going to stop the share. We'll talk for a little bit. Anybody have any questions? I mean, I'm sure people have some questions because we haven't, you know, maybe the first introduction to all this. So number one, key takeaways. HTML, understand how tags work, especially the nesting and the, you know, open and closing tags, opening and closing tags. Okay, that's number one for HTML. If you get that, then you get most of it. There's not a whole lot else. HTML is pretty straightforward. Number two, CSS, understand how to implement CSS across pages. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of stuff on this on Monday. Okay, but the main thing is, right, you build the list of rules. Anytime the browser encounters a matching tag, it displays it according to those rules. Okay, and that's true whether it's just the entire tag or part of the tag or the tag in a particular state, right? So those are all the different ways we've looked at it, but whatever it is, if it's specified in CSS, CSS is a list of rules. When you see this tag in this condition, display it this way. And then as the browser runs across those tags, it's going to display them appropriately. Okay. And yeah, I guess the last thing, right? So maybe check out the on-click attribute from HTML with that example in the slides. But that's JavaScript, and we'll get to it. Okay. So if you like, I mean, I could post up an exercise, but we'll do a little practice. We'll do a little practice on Monday, and then we'll see how all that goes. Then we'll start in on the JavaScript for real. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording. We can still talk for a minute.